Welcome to ManaSota-88's program on the environment. Tonight we have Jane Urquhart with us. Jane is the manager of the Terra Ceia Aquatic Preserve and has a lot of information for us. First of all, I'd like to tell you a good thing that happened in Manatee County today for the environment and the future of our county. 3 of our county commissioners had the wisdom to turn down the Wellcraft Marine proposal to develop a marina in a relatively sensitive area, and one that where a marina would conflict with residential property. So that's a good plus for the future of Sarasota Bay, and we thank Pat Glass, Kent Chutlane, and Kathy Snell for their votes. Jane, getting right into the Terra Ceia Aquatic Preserve, perhaps you could tell us what an aquatic preserve is.
Aquatic preserves are areas of state-owned sovereignty submerged lands, and these are areas, if I can hold this up, this area, or at least the Terra Ceia Aquatic Preserve area, starts just below Port Manatee and follows the Hillsborough-Manatee County line out to a canal and then runs back into Emerson Point, and it includes all of the submerged lands, including Bishop's Harbor, Terra Ceia Bay, Miguel Bay, and all of the little bays and bayous and all of the estuarine systems within that whole area.
And could you tell me, too, what your function is? What does a manager do within these areas?
Well, the whole preserve system and the whole preserve ideology is coupled with 3 or 4 different emphases. One of them is education, and we try to educate the public to the importance of the estuaries and these submerged bottoms. The other is regulatory. We do work with the regulatory agencies, and we do permitting or reviewing of permits that come in for people who want to put in things such as docks and seawalls and things of that matter within the preserve. And then we also, part of our emphasis is on research. So we have a 3-fold purpose.
And although I think most of us, we've discussed Terra Ceia a couple of times in our program, but perhaps you could tell us just what Terra Ceia Bay, you've shown us the outline, but what does it really offer the community as far as marine resources, the future of our area, recreational resources, that sort of thing?
Well, within Manatee County, and also, I'll put up this map, within all of Tampa Bay, Terra Ceia is one of...
I think, wait a minute, let's get this where we can get it here.
Okay. Terra Ceia is one of the last pristine areas, and in Manatee County it is definitely the last pristine area. Most of the other submerged areas are much more developed. Cockroach Bay is above it, and that is also an aquatic preserve and is very pristine. So number one, it provides some of the nicest habitat around for many of our finfish industry. Most of the species that we catch both commercially and recreationally spend at least part of their life cycle within these estuaries. So you have a very large economic industry in Manatee County that is coupled with having these resources available to them.
And I would think that it would be quite a recreational plus for the area as well.
Not only for fishing, but for people who just like to go out and go boating. We have one of the largest rookeries in Terra Ceia Aquatic Preserve, and that is the National Audubon's Washburn Sanctuary. And that is there. It's a beautiful place to go out and go canoeing, to go swimming. It is also an open shell fishing area, which is one of the only ones in Manatee County and one of the last 2 in Tampa Bay. So the shellfish are also able to be harvested out of there.
In the entire Terra Ceia Bay area, or just in parts of that?
The only places you can go shell fishing are the major areas out within the Gulf itself. There are areas that are, or within the bay itself, there are areas back in the bayous that don't get as much circulation, and you can't shellfish in those areas.
We've had a lot of comment lately to ManaSota-88 about the need to do something about a proposed aquatic preserve rule, and that the reorganization that the Department of Natural Resources is planning puts your function under another arm of the department. And we're interested in what that means. Does that mean less protection for Terra Ceia in all our aquatic preserves? Just what does that mean?
Well, that's basically a twofold question. Our rule as it stands now is Chapter 18-20 of the Florida Administrative Code, and there are two rules that deal with building of any sort of development within an aquatic preserve or on any sovereignty submerged lands, whether or not they're within an aquatic preserve. So you have Chapter 18-20, which is the aquatic preserve rule, and you have Chapter 18-21, which is the sovereignty lands rule. It's always been very confusing to not only the everyday citizen, but to developers and everyone else having to deal with the two rules. So the original thought was if you could take both those rules, put them together into one rule, which is now called 1825, then you might eliminate some of the confusion. And of course, every time you open up rules for revision, everyone wants to make changes. And some of the changes have been very good. Some of the changes are up to personal opinion and debate. Some of the things that would be changing would be a consent by rule for single-family docks which meet all of the criteria.
Now that doesn't mean anything probably to most people. Break that down where we can understand it.
Anyone who's ever tried to build a dock knows that there seem to be almost 1 million rules and regulations and also 1 million permits that you have to get. In an attempt to try to cut down some of the red tape on that, what the state would allow you to do is send in a letter stating that you wanted to build a dock of a certain size and specification, and it would have to meet all of the criteria within the rule, and that where you want to place the dock has no critical or valuable resources underneath it. So that if you had a perfectly pristine waterfront and you wanted to put a dock in and there were seagrasses right where you wanted to put your dock, you could not put in a dock there using the consent by rule avenue. You would have to go in and get a permit. You would have to go through the whole process, which is sometimes very long and exhausting. You'd have to have people coming out and do surveys and do tests for the water depths and go out and do a survey for all of the biological resources in the area. So on one level, it would eliminate a lot of the red tape for people interested in single-family docks. On the other hand, people are also, if you own a home, there have probably been millions of wars over whose fence was 1 inch or on the other side, one way or the other, of somebody's property line. And everybody would always like to have just a little bit more. So I am skeptical. It's real hard to say whether people will be really honest with it, and unfortunately, with something of that nature, the only way that the state then would come back and rectify the situation would be by coming back and filing some sort of charges. And then you would have an enforcement issue, and that is an incredibly long process.
Well, I think most of us that are interested in the environment know all too often enforcement actions don't amount to very much and don't accomplish much. So in other words, this new rule will permit people to build a dock with just a general permit with no inspection and no consideration of existing seagrass beds, that sort of thing.
Well, no. A person would have to write to our office or to any of their local state lands offices. At that time, then we would have a 30-day time clock. If we thought that there were resources in the area that were valuable and could be damaged by this proposed dock, we could go out and do a site inspection. And at that point, we could then say, no, you have to come in for the permit.
Now, I think what we're going to do is roll a little background tape of mangroves and show just what's at stake here of some of our sensitive lands. If not now, in a couple of minutes. I think it's coming up now. So in any case, this will remove some of the safeguards, and here we go. You might want to tell a little bit about this.
Well, this is kind of a mixture of a lot of tape that has actually been taken in the 3 aquatic preserves in Tampa Bay. This is up in Pinellas County, which is an aquatic preserve. And the nice thing about our aquatic preserves and the wonderful thing about the habitat we have left in Florida is it can be in your backyard, and if this pans back again, you will notice, and it's going to, amazingly, that this is in someone's backyard, and these are ospreys feeding. Now this is in Manatee County, and this is right off the county's sewage effluent point over by Tropic Isles, and what you are seeing occasionally are manatees surfacing. And what these sewage effluents do is they put areas of fresh water into these saline systems, and the manatees tend to congregate. This is another DNR project that's happening. The funds from the offshore Florida fishermen that they have taxed themselves with their licenses. These funds are being funneled through DNR, and research is going on. And this is one of the research projects. This is seagrass planting, and this was done, this site here was done in Pinellas County, but we have an awful lot more of this also going on in Manatee County. The sites in Manatee County are just below Port Manatee at the Henderson site, which is right up there by Redfish Creek. And hopefully by doing this, these sites are to test how good and how long it takes for mitigation practices to actually become productive ecosystems, and that's under great debate. And one of the, after working on quite a few of these projects, one of the most amazing things is number one, how incredibly labor intensive these mitigation projects are, how incredibly expensive, and it's still up for grabs whether or not they actually produce viable habitat.
Right. From our studies, I think we view the success of these efforts so far without a great deal of joy. And I know that one of the guardians of Terra Ceia Bay, John Keck, who's been our guest a couple of times, has mentioned that at the same time people are engaged in this very labor-intensive, expensive pursuit, that nets are tearing up the seagrass bottoms in Terra Ceia Bay. So he doesn't feel that, he feels that we're getting further behind rather than accomplishing a lot. Now this is Bird Key, is it not?
Yeah, this is Bird Key. These pictures were taken with Alive at 5, which I believe is Channel 8. And we were out in the field all day, and basically we're just taking pictures of the preserve and what was there. And this is the National Audubon Society's Washburn Key. And as you see, we have some wonderful species, bird species out there. The pelicans have made a tremendous comeback.
So has this proposed rule, is it a proposed rule or is it
a proposed rule? It's in the process now of going through public meetings, and there have been 2 that I know of at this point. There is a suggestion that another one be held somewhere within the Tampa Bay area, because the closest one we had to here was in Orlando.
So I did get a notice, I think, of one in Fort Myers, and that hardly seems fair when there's so much interest in this preserve within our area.
Yeah.
So I hope that they'll consider holding one here. Are these some of your densely vegetated grass
Yeah,
beds?
these are seagrass beds within Terra Ceia, and they just provide an amazing amount of habitat. Now this could be up in Bishop's Harbor where these pictures were taken. You have some of the soft coral, and now you get into some of the oyster beds. And what's amazing about all these things is you never have one creature inhabiting a site all by itself. It's always very interwoven with other species and other creatures using the same sort of habitat. And this is turtle grass here, and this is one of the major foraging materials for the manatees.
Well, I think another sort of ridiculous situation has existed, too, in the Port Manatee area prior to our taking action, where there had been a fairly dense seagrass beds. They were being removed in order to transplant them to other areas, with the long-range view, I'm quite sure, of really not having a lot of seagrass when they come up to their proposed dredging project out there. We did object, and in theory that transplanting has stopped.
Yeah.
But I do think we have to be careful and realize there's so much we don't know that we don't want to destroy what we have in the hopes of being able to provide new beds.
Well, it always just seems to me that it's always much more productive to err on the side of being incredibly conservative rather than jumping the gun on something if you don't know it's going to work. Because unfortunately we seem to always learn that we don't know quite as much as we thought we did until we've lost whatever it is or have ruined something in the process of progress. So,
well, I know in the education end that you've been very active and successful in passing your knowledge on, saying a couple of examples to our county commission about a couple of proposed projects. I think Terra Ceia Isles being one, and a project, I believe, to boil sewage on Smead Island as another one, which is in Terra Ceia Bay. And that brings us up to the subject of the importance of education and just what your education program is.
well, we have someone on staff now, Mary Blackburn, who should be well known within the community. She was a teacher here for 20 years. She is working almost full-time now with the Manatee County School District, helping within their outdoor science program. And she works within that program. She also has a number of different programs going with Boy Scouts, Cub Scouts, Girl Scouts, and Eagle Scouts. So she's spread very thin. We try to attend as many of the local festivals. We were out at the Terra Ceia Seafood Festival this last weekend. So education is the very cheapest form of trying to manage the aquatic preserve. If you can get enough people looking for our resources and feeling like they own them, then you've cut the amount of work that we have to do multifold.
Right, I think we're going to break for a couple of minutes and we'll be right back.
Back to ManaSota-88. It's a program on the environment. Tonight our guest is Jane Urquhart, manager of the Terra Ceia Aquatic Preserve. Jane, picking up where we left off, we were discussing the importance of education, and you were talking about the school programs. Since there is such a problem of migration in and out among the adult populace too, and so many people, just a very small percentage of people at this point, have actually lived in Florida more than 10 or 15 years. So have you directed any of these programs to the adult population?
Yeah, we try to keep a lot of our brochures and literature within the visitor center, and that's a good place to start out. And then there seems to be a plethora of people who are looking for programs for their homeowners associations and women's clubs and the JCs, and the range is wide and various. We've talked to church groups, and anyone who wants to ask, we will come and present slideshows and do something for a meeting that you've got.
Well, I think that's marvelous and so important. Do you have a phone number that you'd like to give for people to call?
Yeah, I brought that in, and if we can have that queued up.
Well, it will be here in a minute, but I am glad that you're opening this up to the community so they will learn more about what we have to protect and how sensitive and vital it is to our area.
Well, it almost seems like in Florida, unless you're within the resource, you almost miss it. And one of the nice things about our slideshow is it does seem to open up to people the possibilities that they can drive 2 miles away and they'd be right in an area that looks pristine and doesn't look like anyone has ever been there before.
No, we're still lucky in that respect, and we need to work to keep it that way. Under the new rule, will your education program be affected at all?
No, not as far as we know. Basically, what we are doing, we will become a program instead of a bureau, and we will still be conducting business as usual. Hopefully, that's always up to the powers to be, but at this point we are told that we will continue doing things the way we have always been doing them.
Right. Well, your number is up there on the screen now, and if people want to learn more about this new rule and where they might make comments,
you can contact us, or they can give you a call, and you could give them the number in Tallahassee, or we can send them a copy.
Yeah, I think it'd be good to know that they can call right here locally and get this information, and certainly we'd be glad to supply it too.
Yep.
But I had mentioned some of the concerns that I had about things that I perceived as weakening the rule, but all that you've really brought out tonight that might be a problem is the dock situation.
There is a consent by rule, and that is up for consideration. There is a proposal that single-family docks, the size of the terminal platform, which is now limited to 160 square feet, which is 16 by 10, could be expanded to, I believe, 325 square feet. And that would be, that you would definitely have to get a permit for that sort of dock. And those sorts of docks would be for boat houses.
That's what I was going to ask. I thought that I heard that boathouses
Yeah.
would be permitted too.
Yeah. And that's something new. Now, boathouses in the past have not been permitted because of a policy, and so this would, we have often not permitted them because of shading problems. And this would allow them within the preserve because there has been enough feedback to Tallahassee that these sorts of things are very much wanted, that people want to have boathouses.
Well, I think if they take the long-range view and realize the effect that this could have on seagrass and some of our marine organisms, that perhaps they would be willing to give this up or to keep the thing the way it is so we can preserve this valuable resource. Do you have any more that you could tell us about issues that are threatening Port Manatee? Excuse me, I just said it, threatening Terra Ceia Isles, and I specifically am thinking of Port Manatee.
Well, Port Manatee is always an issue. We recently, at one of the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council meetings, there was a presentation given by the Coast Guard, and they are, since the accident in Alaska, all of the Coast Guard stations have been re-evaluating their hazardous spills and their contingency plans. And in looking through their previous report, it was the two sites in Tampa Bay that have the worst accident records and also have the worst grounding records are at the point right at Port Manatee and at the point turning in up in Pinellas County to the power plant up there. And hopefully the new report should be out, I was told, in January, and hopefully at that point they will address this issue more closely. But if with Port Manatee wanting to expand its facilities and with the TECO power plant being proposed for the site in Cockroach Bay, it only seems to indicate that Port Manatee is going to become more and more active. And they certainly need to be looking at what sort of oil spill contingency plans they have for that site.
Well, I think we know, too, that oil spill contingency plans are of little value if you have anything other than virtually a dead sea. And as far as the port expanding is concerned, we hardly oppose that as long as they're losing money and pose such a threat to the environment. And I just don't think too much more money, at least one hopes, other than the federal taxpayer money that was just given to them, will be expended on what's surely a losing situation and something that isn't compatible with our area. So as far as the TECO plant is concerned, as you may know, ManaSota-88 has challenged the Hillsborough Comprehensive Plan and the designation of the Cockroach Bay site as a future power plant site. Whether it will be successful remains to be seen. But in the interim, we deeply appreciate what you're doing and the knowledge that you're bringing to our area and the protection you're affording. I know that you get out and respond to reports when people call you, and they're very appreciative of your interest. I think John Keck pointed out a particular island where the mangroves had been chopped down. Are things improving in that particular area?
Well, I think it seems to me that there was some coverage on TV and also an article written in the paper about it. The problem with that is that the owners of the upland property are, the property is held in trust for numerous different owners by a bank. So for us to go, or actually for the Department of Environmental Regulations to go onto any sort of an enforcement on this cutting of mangroves, we would have to go against the bank or against the people who own the islands, which is a large conglomerate of people, evidently.
Right. Well, that makes it very complicated, but with less than 2 minutes to go, what would you say are the most important things people can do to protect their aquatic preserves?
Be aware, be vocal. If someone's doing something that you don't approve of, the only way anything's going to change is if you let your congressmen, senators, legislatures, contact the people at DNR and let them know what you think about how your aquatic preserve is being run, because it is your aquatic preserve.
And close to home, too, I think we can also let our county commissioners know and gain their support that's necessary when dealing with the department and our legislators. But again, I want to thank you for the job you're doing, and I think we have something very valuable to protect and something that's unique in an area that's growing at the rate that ours is.
It's something definitely worth saving.
I'd like to thank you all for being with us tonight. And 2 weeks from tonight, we're going to have Kent Chatelain with us. And next week, I think we'll be here, have someone here to discuss what's happening with our freshwater systems and our estuarine areas. Thanks for being with us. Good night.